Three guys wanted to attend the Olympic Games, but they had no tickets to the events. As they stood around watching, they noticed that the participants in the games all went in at a certain gate, and that many were carrying sports gear for their event. The three began to get creative, and as they looked a bit, the first spotted some electrical conduit left over from construction work. He picked up a length of this pipe, walked up to the gate and said, "Pole vault," and they waved him in. The second guy discovered a manhole cover, picked it up, walked up to the gate, said, "Discus," and they waved him in. The third guy looked for some time before he spotted a roll of barbed wire. He picked this up, threw it on his shoulder, walked up to the gate, and announced, "Fencing." A couple were going out for the evening. They'd gotten ready, all dressed up, cat put out, etc. The taxi arrives, and as the couple got out, the cat shoots back in. They don't want the cat shut in the house, so the wife goes out to the taxi while the husband goes upstairs to chase the cat out. The wife, not wanting it known that the house will be empty, explains to the taxi driver, "He's just going upstairs to say goodbye to my mother." A few minutes later, the husband gets into the cab. "Sorry I took so long," he says. "Stupid old thing was hiding under the bed, and I had to poke her with a coat hanger to get her to come out." Observing from a distance, the store manager watches with concern as a salesperson engages in a heated exchange with a disgruntled customer. After a few tense minutes, the customer storms out of the store, leaving behind a notable air of frustration. Approaching the salesperson with a furrowed brow, the manager's disapproval is clearly evident. "I saw what just happened," the manager begins, his tone tinged with disappointment. "And it seems you've forgotten our motto, 'The customer is always right.'" Apologizing, salesperson attempts to explain, but the manager cuts them off firmly. "No excuses. The customer is always right." With a resigned nod, the salesperson accepts the rebuke, understanding the importance of prioritizing customer satisfaction. Curiosity aroused, the manager presses on, "What exactly were you two arguing about?" Reluctantly, the salesperson admits, "Well, you see, sir, he called you an idiot." A teacher, a petty thief, and a lawyer die and go to heaven. When they arrive at the pearly gates, they are met by St. Peter. St. Peter says, "Sorry, heaven's crowding up, so you will need to answer a question correctly to get in." He looks at the teacher and asks, "What was the name of the famous ocean liner that sank after hitting an iceberg?" "Oh, that's easy," replies the teacher, "the Titanic." So, St. Peter opens the gates and lets the teacher enter into heaven. Next, St. Peter turns to the petty thief. Deciding to make his question a bit more difficult, he asks, "How many people died on the Titanic?" "Oh," says the thief excitedly, "I just saw the movie. It was about 1,500, I think." St. Peter opens the gates, and the thief enters into heaven. Finally, St. Peter turns to the lawyer and says, "So, 1,500 people died when the Titanic sank. Name them." "Wait! Want to make a difference? For every 1,000 subscribers and likes, I'll donate $100 to a senior in need. Help me help the elderly. Subscribe now!" A man in Alberta wakes up one morning to find a bear on his roof. So, he looks in the yellow pages, and sure enough, there's an ad for Alberta bear removers. He calls the number, and the man says he'll be over in 30 minutes. The bear remover arrives and gets out of his van. He's got a ladder, a baseball bat, 12-gauge shotgun, and a mean, heavily scarred old pit bull. "What are you going to do?" the homeowner asks. "I'm going to put this ladder up against the roof, then I'm going to go up there, and I'll knock the bear off the roof with this baseball bat. When the bear falls off the roof, the pit bull is trained to grab his testicles and not let go. The bear will then be subdued enough for me to put him in the cage in the back of the van." He then hands the shotgun to the homeowner. "What's the shotgun for?" asks the homeowner. If the bear knocks me off the roof, shoot the dog. It. Little Johnny attended a horse auction with his father. He watched as his father moved from horse to horse, running his hands up and down the horse's legs, rump, and chest. After a few minutes, Johnny asked, "Dad, why are you doing that?" His father replied, "Because when I'm buying horses, I have to make sure that they are healthy and in good shape before I buy." Johnny, looking worried, said, "Dad, I think the UPS guy wants to buy Mom." A teacher asks her class for some examples of medicines they know. Little Harry promptly raises his hands and says, "Tylenol for headaches." The teacher says, "Very good, Harry. Anyone else?" Little Jenny answers from the back, Ambien, my mom tells me it helps her sleep." The teacher smiles at her and says, "Good job, Jenny," then turns to her class and goes on. "Listen here, children. Always be careful with medicines at home, okay? Now, does anyone else have another example?" Little Johnny raises his hand slowly and says, "For diarrhea?" The teacher freezes for a second before the rest of his statement hits her and she stammers out, "For diarrhea?" Little Johnny explains, "Yeah, my mom keeps telling my dad to take it. It'll harden his up." A man in a bar notices a beautiful woman, always alone, that comes in on a regular basis. He wants to meet her, but he just can't seem to find the courage to approach her. After the second week, he decides to make his move. Despite his best game, the man can't achieve any progress with her. "No, thank you," she would always say. The man is persistent, and finally, one night, they strike up a conversation. They have an instant connection, but things never get past the formalities. One night he asks her if she would like to come back to his place. "No, thank you," she says politely. "Why won't you come home with me?" he asks. "Well," she replies, "this may sound rather odd in this day and age, but I'm keeping myself pure until I meet the man I love." "Wow, that must be rather difficult," says the man. "Oh, I don't really mind too much," the woman replies, "but it has my husband pretty upset." Many years ago, there were two sisters, one blonde and one brunette, who inherited the family ranch. Unfortunately, after just a few years, they were in financial trouble. In order to keep the bank from repossessing the ranch, they needed to purchase a bull from a stockyard in a faraway town so that they could breed their own stock. At this point, they were down to their last $600. Upon leaving, the brunette told her sister, "When I get there, if I decide to buy the bull, I'll contact you to drive out after me and haul it home." The brunette arrived at the stockyard, inspected the bull, and decided she wanted to buy it. The man told her that he will sell it for $599, and no less. After paying him, she drove to the nearest town to send her sister a telegram to tell her the news. She walked into the telegraph office and said, "I want to send a telegram to my sister telling her that I've bought a bull for our ranch. I need her to hitch the trailer to our pickup truck and drive out here so we can haul it home." The telegraph operator explained that he'd be glad to help her, then added, "It's just 99 cents a word." Well, after paying for the bull, the brunette only had $1 left. She realized that she'd only be able to send her sister one word. After a few minutes of thinking, she nodded and said, "I want you to send her the word comfortable." The operator shook his head. "How is she ever going to know that you want her to hitch the trailer to your pickup truck? Then, drive out here to haul that bull back to your ranch. If you send her just the word comfortable," the brunette explained, "my sister's blonde, and the word's big so she'll read it very slowly. Come for the bull." I was on vacation in Florida on Christmas vacation. I was walking down the beach, and I see one of my colleagues approaching me. He is a psychologist. "You had breakfast yet?" I ask. "No." Let's find a place. Good, he says. My car is right over there. I get in his car, a brand new Lincoln, and right away I notice that it's a stick shift. I say, "You bought a new Lincoln with a stick shift? I didn't know that they made a Lincoln like that." "They don't," he says. "I ordered it special." "I'll bet that cost a fortune," I reply. "Oh yeah, you got that right. Why would you buy a new Lincoln with a stick shift?" I ask. He says, "My wife can't drive a stick." Lawyers should never ask a Georgia grandma a question if they aren't prepared for the answer. In a trial, a southern small-town prosecuting attorney called his first witness, a grandmotherly, elderly woman, to the stand. He approached her and asked, "Mrs. Jones, do you know me?" She responded, "Why, yes, I do know you, Mr. Williams. I've known you since you were a boy. And frankly, you've been a big disappointment to me. You lie, you cheat on your wife, and you manipulate people and talk about them behind their backs. You think you're a big shot when you haven't the brains to realize you'll never amount to anything more than a two-bit paper pusher. Yes, I know you." The lawyer was stunned. Not knowing what else to do, he pointed across the room and asked, "Mrs. Jones, do you know the defense attorney?" She again replied, "Why, yes, I do. I've known Mr. Bradley since he was a youngster, too. He's lazy, bigoted, and he has a drinking problem. He can't build a normal relationship with anyone, and his law practice is one of the worst in the entire state. Not to mention he cheated on his wife with 3 different women. One of them was your wife. Yes, I know him." The defense attorney nearly died. The judge asked both counselors to approach the bench and, in a very quiet voice, said, "If either of you idiots asks her if she knows me, I'll send you both to the electric chair." The city health inspector walks into a new restaurant unannounced and takes a seat where he can see the kitchen. While he is sitting there, an order goes back for a pizza. The chef appears, and the health inspector nearly chokes when he sees that he is not wearing a shirt. As if the health inspector didn't already have enough fuel for his citation writing pen, the chef proceeded to grab a lump of pizza dough and press it out flat on his bare chest. Appalled, the health inspector had barely finished up when an order came back for a hamburger. The cook proceeded to grab a handful of ground meat and pressed it into a perfect patty in his armpit. Shocked and bewildered, the health inspector called for the manager and explained the gravity of the deplorable conditions he had seen. "That's nothing," replied the manager. "You should come back at 5 in the morning when he makes the donuts." 2 cowboys came upon an Indian lying on his stomach with his ear to the ground. One of the cowboys stops and says to the other, "You see that Indian?" "Yeah," says the other cowboy. "Look," says the first one. "He's listening to the ground. He can hear things for miles in any direction." Just then, the Indian looks up. "Covered wagon," he says, "about 2 miles away. Have 2 horses, 1 brown, 1 white. Man, woman, child, furniture in wagon." "Incredible," says the cowboy to his friend. "This Indian knows how far away they are, how many horses, what color, what's in the wagon. Just amazing." The Indian looks up and says, "Not amazing. Wagon ran over me 30 minutes ago." 2 women came before wise King Solomon, dragging between them a young man in a 3-piece suit. "This young lawyer agreed to marry my daughter," said the first one. "No, he agreed to marry my daughter," said the other. And so they haggled before the king until he called for silence. "Bring me my biggest sword," said Solomon, "and I shall hew the young attorney in half. Each of you shall receive a half." "Sounds good to me," said the first woman. But the other woman said, "Oh, sire, do not spill innocent blood. Let the other woman's daughter marry him." The wise king did not hesitate a moment. "The attorney must marry the first lady's daughter," he proclaimed. "But she was willing to hew him in 2, exclaimed the king's court. "Indeed," said wise King Solomon, "and that proves she is, indeed, the true mother-in-law." It was a regular day at first grade, and the teacher asked all the students to tell her something about what their parents do for a living. Some kids knew and gave a good description, while others didn't really understand their parents' jobs and gave vague descriptions or none at all. When they got to little Johnny, he stood up and said, "My dad cuts people in half." "Oh, really?" asked the teacher with a smile. "You mean he's a magician?" "I don't know," said Johnny. "A surgeon, maybe?" asked the teacher. "I don't know," repeated Johnny. "Then why do you think he cuts people in half?" asked the confused teacher. "Because I have 2 half-brothers and 3 half-sisters." There were 2 brothers, Bob and Joe. One day, Bob came home from hunting with a dead bear. Joe said, "Whoa, how did you get that?" Bob said, "It's quite simple. I see tracks. I follow tracks. I see bear. I shoot bear. Bear, stop." The next day, Bob gets a call from the hospital telling him that Joe was in an accident. He rushes to the hospital. There, he sees Joe lying on a hospital bed. He asks Joe what happened, and he says, "I see tracks. I follow tracks. I see train. I shoot train. Train don't stop." An old man got married, and right after the wedding, he had to move to another country for work. 5 years later, he finally returned home. The moment he walked through the front door, 3 kids came running towards him, shouting, "Daddy! Daddy!" Completely baffled, the old man stood there in shock. "What is this? Who are these kids?" he asked, scratching his head in confusion. His wife leaned in closer, a mischievous grin spreading across her face. "Well," she said, "honey, you went all the way to another country to work for me. While you were off working hard, I figured I'd work hard too. Do you really think I wouldn't do at least this much for you in return?" 2 elderly gentlemen were sitting on a bus bench when a stunning young blonde in a short skirt got off the bus. One of them leaned over to the other and said, "Boy, I sure wouldn't mind getting a piece of that." The other old-timer chuckled and replied, "Yeah, me too. But these days, mine just doesn't work anymore." The first guy grinned and said, "Don't you know how to keep it working?" Curious, his friend asked, "No, how?" He replied, "You've got to eat a lot of French bread." Determined, the second man headed to the store and bought 100 loaves of French bread. At the checkout, the cashier raised an eyebrow and said, "You know, all that bread is going to go stale before you can eat it." The old man beamed and replied, "Oh, so you've heard about it too." What organ can expand to 10 times its size? The 6th grade science teacher, Mrs. Parks, asked her class, which human body part increases to 10 times its size when stimulated? No one answered, so the teacher picked on a random student. Little Mary stood up and said, "You should not be asking 6th graders a question like that. I'm going to tell my parents, and they will go and tell the principal, who will then fire you." Mrs. Parks ignored her and asked the question again. Which body part increases to 10 times its size when stimulated? Little Mary's mouth fell open. Then she said to those around her, "Boy, is she going to get in big trouble." The teacher continued to ignore her and said to the class, "Anybody?" Finally, Billy stood up, looked around nervously, and said, "The body part that increases 10 times its size when stimulated is the pupil of the eye." Mrs. Parks said, "Very good, Billy," then turned to Mary and continued, "As for you, young lady, I have 3 things to say. 1, you have a dirty mind. 2, you didn't read your homework. And 3, one day you are going to be very, very disappointed. Sit. A programmer and his project manager board a train headed through the mountains. They can find no other place to sit, except for 2 seats right across the aisle from a young woman and her grandmother. After a while, it becomes quite clear that the woman and the programmer are interested in each other, as they keep looking at each other. Soon, the train passes into a tunnel, and it is pitch black. There is the sound of a kiss, followed by the sound of a slap. When the train finally emerges from the tunnel, the 4 sit there without saying a word. The grandmother thinks to herself, "It was very rude of that young man to kiss my granddaughter, but I am glad she slapped him." The project manager thinks to himself, "I did not think the programmer was brave enough to kiss the woman, but I wish she hadn't missed him when she slapped me." The young woman thought to herself, "I am glad the guy kissed me, but I wish my grandmother had not slapped him." The programmer has a satisfied smile on his face and thinks, "Life is good." How often does a guy have a chance to kiss a beautiful woman and slap his project manager at the same time? Bob had a reputation for enjoying his evenings a little too much, and this night was no exception. He staggered home late, careful not to wake his peacefully sleeping wife as he slipped into bed. Little did he know, the night would take a turn that no amount of caution could prevent. When morning came, Bob wasn't greeted by the warm comfort of his bedroom. Instead, he found himself standing before the grand, glowing pearly gates. "Am I dreaming?" he muttered, rubbing his eyes. Before him stood St. Peter, clipboard in hand and an expression of gentle solemnity. "Bob, I'm sorry to tell you this, but you passed away in your sleep," St. Peter said with a sympathetic nod. Bob's eyes widened in disbelief. "No, this can't be happening. I'm not ready. I've got so much to do, so much to live for." St. Peter, moved by Bob's desperate plea, paused thoughtfully before offering an unusual alternative. "Well, there is one way to go back," he said, "but it comes with a catch. You'd have to return as a chicken." A lawyer and his 2 friends, a rabbi and a Hindu holy man, found themselves stranded in the countryside after their car broke down. Seeking shelter for the night, they approached a farmer for help. The farmer kindly agreed, but said, "I only have room for 2 of you in the house. One of you will have to sleep in the barn." The rabbi quickly volunteered, saying, "My people wandered the desert for 40 years. Spending a night in the barn is no hardship for me." With that, he headed to the barn, while the others settled in for the night. But soon there was a knock at the door. The farmer opened it to find the rabbi standing there. "What's the matter?" the farmer asked. The rabbi explained, "Thank you for your generosity, but I cannot sleep in the barn. There's a pig in there, and my faith considers it an unclean animal." Hearing this, the Hindu holy man offered to take his place. Grateful, the rabbi returned to the house while his friend went to the barn. Not long after, there was another knock at the door. The farmer opened it to see the Hindu holy man. "What now?" the farmer asked, exasperated. The holy man said, "I appreciate your kindness, but there's a cow in the barn. In my culture, cows are sacred, and I cannot disturb such holy ground." With no other option, the lawyer reluctantly agreed to sleep in the barn. Grumbling, he left the house, and the others finally settled in for the night. But moments later, there was yet another knock at the door. The farmer, now thoroughly frustrated, opened it, and there stood the pig and the cow. Sarah's parents are excited to meet her new boyfriend. This is the first time the 28-year-old has brought a man to meet her parents. Her mother slaved over a hot stove all day, while the father cleaned the house and cut the grass. They both wore their best clothes and waited for Sarah. At 8 p.m., they hear that ring. They open the door, and Sarah is there, standing next to a huge man full of tattoos and a face that looks like it has been in every possible fight, with scars aplenty crossing his face. He looks like he beats people for a living. After some hesitant pleasantries, the shocked parents take Sarah to the kitchen. "What the heck, Sarah?" asked her mother. "Why would you date a guy like that? He looks like a thug." "You've got him all wrong," said Sarah, irritated. "He's an incredibly nice and charitable guy." "What makes you say that?" asked her father. "Well, just this month he spent 200 hours serving his community." A couple invites their family over for Thanksgiving night and invites the whole family to spend the holiday and meal together. The family gathers, but the couple's children are late, and the mother-in-law complains aloud, "Ugh, your children, always late." Eventually, everyone comes and sits down to eat. The mother-in-law insists on sitting at the head of the table, and no one has the strength to argue with her. After a few minutes, the hungry mother-in-law begins to complain, "Ugh, what's with the food here? Why is it always late?" A few minutes later, the couple bring out the meal they have prepared for their family, mostly cooked by the wife. Everyone eats, and the evening continues. While they are in the middle of their main course, the mother-in-law says, "Ugh, I better start clearing the dishes so we can at least move on to the last dish on time." A mere second after she gets up, the large wall clock hanging over the head of the table falls down, reducing her chair to pieces and almost hitting her. Everyone is in shock until the bride mumbles to herself, "Ugh, this clock, always late." A boy goes to his father and asks him, "Daddy, how was I born?" "Ah, very well," his dad sighed. "One day you'll find out anyway. How shall I put it in a way your generation will understand?" "Well," he said, "Mom and Dad got together in a chat room. Dad set up a date via email with your mom, and we met at a cyber cafe. We snuck into a secluded room, and then your mother downloaded from your dad's memory stick. As soon as Dad was ready for an upload, it was discovered that neither one of us had used a firewall. Since it was too late to hit the delete button, 9 months later, the blessed virus appeared. And that's the story." 18. Little Johnny woke up in the middle of the night and went to the bathroom. On his way back to bed, he passed by his parents' room and noticed the covers moving up and down. Curious, he called out, "Hey, Dad, what are you doing?" His dad replied, "Playing cards." Still curious, little Johnny asked, "Who's your partner?" His dad answered, "Your mom." Satisfied, Johnny continued down the hall and past his older sister's room. Once again, he noticed the covers bouncing. "Hey, sis, what are you doing?" he asked. She replied, "Playing cards." "Who's your partner?" Johnny asked. "My boyfriend," she answered. A little while later, Johnny's dad got up to use the bathroom. As he passed by little Johnny's room, he noticed the covers moving there too. "Johnny, what are you doing?" his dad asked. "Playing cards," Johnny replied. His dad chuckled and asked, "Really? Who's your partner?" Little Johnny grinned and said, "You don't need a partner if you've got a good hand." A young Italian girl was going on her first date. Before the date, her nonna decided to give her some advice. Nonna said, "Sita here Anna let me tell you about those younger boys. He's a-gonna try and kiss you. You are a-gonna like that. But don't let him do that. He's a-gonna try Anna kiss your breasts. You are a-gonna like that too. But don't let him do that. But most important, he's a-gonna try Anna lay on top of you. You are a-gonna like that. But don't let him do that. Doing that will disgrace the family." With that bit of advice, the granddaughter went on her date. The next day, she told Grandma that her date went just like she had predicted. "Nonna, I didn't let him disgrace the family. When he tried, I just turned over, got on top of him, and disgraced his family." A couple just had their first son. The husband is half Irish and half Indian. The wife is half Chinese and half Italian. That's a lot of heritage to inherit. They talk about it, and they discover they both wish to have their son named after their heritage. A terrible argument ensues, causing both of them a lot of anguish. After a few days, they finally came to a decision that made both of them happy. They decided on the name Ravi Oli.